Thank you all for hanging around. We hope that was full of wisdom and nuggets. And now, actually, want to offer some time for question and answers for those of you who have time to stick around. Myself and our my colleague Sarah will stay and just answer any questions that come up for you, or just some thoughts that you'd like to put in the atmosphere, and we can stay longer and address those. So one that is coming up in different ways is this idea of leaders. The typical leaders in your congregations are also overwhelmed, and particularly around this time, unable to continue their work this at the same magnitude. Another form of that question is, with a disaster happening, those who usually run certain things are just not able to continue. And so this idea of working together can be really difficult when you have your typical leaders, not able to. And so I just want to kind of talk about a little bit about how we can work around, these typical structures. One way that comes up to me, really leaning into the tip of wisdom around being open to something different and something new. How we trust new people who maybe are available or willing to do different kind of work. I know Advent's coming, and so maybe the church won't be decorated. Maybe we're not even meeting in person, but maybe somebody's willing to do music on their piano at home weekly, just as an offering versus doing an actual event at the church. Or just being open to either a different kind of event or a new person. One thing that has been so helpful that I've seen congregations do across the board is just a simple ask of their people. What is it they actually want? What is it they need? I think there's an assumption sometimes that as leaders that we want to produce the same thing for people. And in moments of crisis and disaster, familiarity is very comforting. And so I do think that when I name that, seeing the same decorations or having a similar program does bring comfort. But in that, how do we really weave in our theological and spiritual, identity in this moment to help transfer and transition us if we can't do the same thing? And so some of that is asking new people or being open to new ideas. And one of the elements is the grace, accepting the limit of, hey, we just can't do this. And just sitting in that and grieving with folk around that, but also weaving that into our spiritual practice and who we are as Christians. I don't know, Sarah, if you want to add anything else to, how do we hold or deal with if working together in the traditional way, which we used to, is just not functioning if we don't have the same leadership or the same ability to do what we normally do?
Right. It's almost doing the best that you can with what you have. And I think, that, Caroline Hamilton here, Arnold, talk about that grace when, trauma brings short tempers and conflict. I mean, this is when people are tired, when people are frustrated, when, there's just like how much longer this is going to take. So it's really being comfortable, that you're doing the best that you can with the resources and the abilities that you have and what's available and what's allowed even. Because I think a lot of the choices are being taken out of our hands. We see a lot of places are shutting down again. And so for those who were maybe hopeful that things were, now we're going to, we may meet for Christmas and now we may not. And so it's being able to say the intentions are there and we would if we could, but that doesn't mean that it cannot be meaningful. Meaningful things can happen in many different ways. And just because it's not happening the same way it happens every year doesn't make it less meaningful.
Definitely. And around that, it was more of a comment than a question, just a sentiment that the congregation is wanting to be social and not distancing and kind of showing up. And that could be a stressor if that's unsafe for the congregation or the leader, the clergy person is wanting us to actually stop and be limited or accept that grace. And so, again, not necessarily a question, but this sentiment of people kind of getting to their wits end and being like, you know what, I don't care if I don't care if I die, I just need to be able to do this thing. And maybe being irresponsible with their own health or potentially affecting someone else. How do we hold that moment? My first thought around that would be really just maybe having an open conversation about the way that feels or the overwhelmingness, and acknowledging that feeling done is okay. That's a normal feeling, like just being like, I don't care anymore. But really processing and talking about the real impact of that. What does it really mean if we do continue to push forward, even if it's not getting COVID, right? Even if it's not even getting sick, but we're going to push through. What are some of those long-term impacts of kind of forcing a moment that it seems like the Spirit's kind of saying, hey, there's grace to be limited, there's grace to do something different, and talking through and thinking through how forcing through or pushing through could lead to other kinds of burnout or other kinds of issues that we may in the moment just aren't able to think through. I don't know if Sarah, if you have anything else to add to that, but
Yeah, the opposite of that would be, what new opportunities and new experiences would this bring me? Sometimes we just have to. I always, when we catastrophizing, which means we go to the worst case scenario. It's like this, this is going to be the worst Christmas, or this is going to be the, I always say, to my clients that you have to be equal thinker, you have to give yourself to be equal thinkers, opportunities to equally think. And so if we're going to think about worst case scenarios, if that makes you feel better, because some people really want to plan for worst case. Some people are like that, right? They need to have a plan. Then I always say that's great, because if you need that, that's fine. But then you have to be fair to yourself, and you have to think about the best case scenario. All right. And best case scenarios may be that you might have an experience that you've never had before, and that may be life changing, because you gave yourself the chance to say, you know what, God, this is not what I was planning, but you have a plan. And so what is your vision for my holiday, for my church and my our leadership, and how do we hold our members during this time? This is my vision, but it's not working out. What's your vision for this? And being open to that, and then discovering, I've never thought of that. And, it's the Spirit of God just putting things into our hearts and our minds, and being open to that. Absolutely.
yeah, definitely. I agree. Just I love the idea of what we might be forfeiting. I think I've heard a lot in the church right now how the pandemic has made all these issues happen, and to the extent I would say yes, but really, if we're honest with ourselves, these have been brewing for a while. Like this kind of sentiments of what we've been feeling have been there. But any kind of crisis, whether it's a pandemic or a natural disaster, I know some of us are here from Iowa, and we're just grateful that you were to join us seeking, we have actual natural disasters as a one-time event, but that has affected us before or during this happened. And now this pandemic and all these other issues kind of compiled. So this idea that if we had any kind of sentiments ahead of time, if our members were not so much helping before, if we really were struggling to do some things before, that crisis is going to magnify that. And so this could be almost an opportunity to almost relieve yourself of that stress, or just acknowledge what might have been there, and think of what's coming, what's new. As much as this might be over, we know that if you remember the slide on natural disasters, there's like a honeymoon phase, and then there's this that drop off that you really do have to sit in the new normal. And sometimes we never go back to normal, whether we push through or not, whether it's still in our psyches, or now because of this natural disaster, because of this pandemic, systems have changed, people have left, or things have shifted. And so being just kind of being surrendered to that and seeing what it could become new, it's almost easier to do it when you have the excuse of it happening than to push through, and then now all of a sudden you have to go back and go, we do have to change in that way. It is so multifaceted. There's so many different levels to it. I think there's just a question on what do you do with those who are getting news from certain kind of news outlets that might, I guess it's QAnon, I guess was named here, and that's their influence. I think again, that's one of those, I don't say issues, but that's one of those cultural elements that really isn't tied to the actual disaster. And so I would think about, what is the motivation? What is the psychological motivation or emotional motivation that these types of outlets, or whether it's news, whether it's a person, whether it's just, I just want to see my grandkids, whatever that motivation is to maybe put yourself in risk, or to do something that you might say, hey, the Spirit's welcoming us to be limited. And the person's like, I need to keep doing this one thing. I would, as personally, I sit with and process what's the psychological need? What's the emotional need? If hearing this type of like belief system, what is that feeding? And why are we feeding that? Why do we need that fed, right? If I say, hey, everybody, that this disaster has changed our structure, it has changed the way we communicate, and that really is triggering for somebody, and they're just super like, that can't happen, then I'm going to sit with them and just want to know more why. Why is this so frightening, or why is this such an issue? In that conversation, I get more details and a little bit more specifics around who that person is. Usually it has nothing to do with the news they watch, right? Or it has nothing to do with, it's something that has been there, something that's already existing, that news outlet or that person or that desire just really feeds at the time. And so I know that doesn't answer your question totally, but I try to process the emotional and the spiritual need that it's filling. I don't know, Sarah, if you want to add anything to that or not, I'll go back to our.
No, just, like you said, there's reasons why people feel and think the way that they feel, and we might not agree with them. And I think there's beauty in when somebody shares with us something that is polar opposites of things that we believe or things that we hold, that sometimes the answer can just be, I'm glad that you shared that with me, and thank you for trusting me with that, because some people feel that that they can't voice their opinion, or they can't say what they feel. You don't have to agree with them to be able to tell them, thank you for sharing that with me. And
Mhm.
it goes a long way.
Definitely. One thing is a kind of a comment, but that wasn't a question that I'll just name. And then if we don't have more questions, we can totally wrap up. But just emphasizing that our responses to disaster or pandemic, whatever, they're both the same kind of, may not look so noticeable at first. I remember the slide that Sara showed that our actual symptoms can be relational. They can be irritation with your child that, it has nothing to do with COVID. It could be cognitive. You're just thinking too slow or thinking too fast. You may not be as hungry. You may not be as thrilled to do the things you want to do. And just interpersonal, like it's harder to deal with people who are different from you. At this point, you're just like, you have nothing else to give. Your capacity is full. And I just want to kind of reiterate that isn't because we're bad Christians. That isn't because we're bad parents or bad people. That when a crisis happens, or when you have a global crisis, honestly, your psyche is going to hold that information until it can make sense of it all. And so another reason why we might be flooding to certain kind of news outlets or picking sides on some things, it could just be a need to control or a need to feel affirmed or be settled in one thing because nothing else seems to be that way. And that may not be as helpful, but I do try in these moments of crisis to lift up the ways in which crisis impacts us. And so if we're behaving a certain way, how does our theology, how does our spirituality kind of affirm us and help us try something different or do something different? Really locating why are we reacting this way? Why are we believing this way when before it wasn't there, right? Or before it wasn't as pronounced in that way. Let's see. Anything else from those of you still on? Questions you may have, we're open, or anything you might want to discuss. Awesome. I'll lift up one last comment as we close then, unless there are more thoughts or questions that may come up for you. One of the things that always stood out to me about thinking about disaster and how we hold it all is really a lot more practical than spiritual sometimes. I think they're the same, but like I think sometimes as people of faith, we either go extremely practical where we're kind of in crisis mode and we're ready to tackle it and finish it up and wrap it up, or we kind of completely distance from the moment and go really maybe more cosmic, more spiritual. And I just want to name that's normal. And the hope is that we're somehow doing both and weaving out both and letting both of our personhoods show up. So I did want to go back to this idea of simplifying and rationing our energy and really planning for the moment, which is a really practical skill. It's not something that is deeply, you have to critical think about it. But if you wake up and next week is coming, Thanksgiving's coming, and you haven't grocery shopped, then, maybe this year it's going to be different. Or you would just plan for this dinner for Thursday night and worry about Thanksgiving later. Or even if it's, you have a series of meetings coming in the month of December, you're still trying to get power, in your house, you're still trying to clean up after disaster, just taking the day by day. Did we get this room cleaned up? Did we get this actually structured? Versus thinking too far in advance. That practice is invaluable. I think of the scripture, give us this day our daily bread. As a
Mhm.
therapist, I'm always like, yes, that's being present. That's holding on to what we can hold on to. And then in Joshua, where the fire by night, cloud by day, it's like,
Mhm.
look, I'll let you know when it's time to move, but just focus on this one moment. And so just want to
Mhm.
encourage people to plan for the moment and be present versus thinking too far in advance.
Mhm.
Any last thoughts and we'll close. All right. With that said, we hope this information is meaningful to your souls and that you, if anything that we said, walk away with just knowing that this is a season for grace, right? This is a season for waiting. Advent is coming
Mhm.
as waiting. In waiting, we are limited, we are vulnerable. We don't know, but we are open to what can come,
Amen.
and standing in peace until it does. And so we pray that you all have this in your souls as you go forward, and just blessings to you all surviving whatever crisis or disaster that you are surviving in this moment.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you.